The sirens were never meant to scare you. They were the overture. In the kind of town where whispers travel faster than the evening news, you learned that a name can be treated like a headline and a life like a case file. Eyes followed you from porch lights to pews, from checkout aisles to group chats, turning curiosity into a ritual. Watch, guess, repeat. They thought they were building a narrative. Heaven was building a stage. What they didn't anticipate was the moment the spotlight flips, when the one being observed stops shrinking and starts seeing. You didn't become paranoid, you became precise. The glare that was supposed to blind you became the illumination that revealed patterns. Who smiles for a crowd and sneers in the dark? Who quotes scripture to control and forgets mercy when the doors close? And that's when the plot turned. The surveillance they designed became God's unveiling for you. It always starts quietly. Conversations thin when you walk in. Laughter dies mid-air. A room full of judges appears, none of them appointed, all of them certain. The first lie is that you're the danger. The second is that their concern is love. But you noticed how concern always arrived with a script. Stand small, speak soft, apologize for shining. You used to explain yourself to buy peace. That's over now. The day you stopped defending your innocence was the day your discernment found its voice. You didn't yell, you didn't slam doors, you just refused to bow to performance. And that refusal rang louder than any siren they could sound. If the town is a theater, then their roles were already rehearsed. Someone plays detective. Someone plays prophet with a badge. Someone plays friend who delivers updates to the chorus. But you didn't audition. You carried a different authority, the kind that doesn't need a microphone to be heard. When a chosen one walks into a spiritually sleeping place, the atmosphere registers it before the people do. Eyes can pretend, rooms cannot. A stillness settles, not the brittle quiet of fear, but the heavy hush of truth arriving. It's the same quiet that followed Jesus into rooms where masks were glued on with piety, calm, unhurried, unseduced by spectacle. That's the authority you carry now, not the power to dominate, but the weight to reveal. They were never ready for revelation. They were ready for a scandal. They waited for a misstep they could magnify, for a rumor they could canonize. Yet while they watched your hands, God was healing your heart. While they tracked your footsteps, heaven ordered them. And as they counted your mistakes, the Lord was counting something else. The days you endured without retaliating, the nights you prayed through the panic, the mornings you rose with a clean conscience when a dirty story would have been easier. You didn't survive their gaze by hiding. You survived it by being seen, by the one who sees in secret, measures motives, and keeps the kind of receipts no counsel can edit. Here's what their plan never accounted for. Being watched trained you. You learned to hear the difference between counsel and control, community and crowd, accountability and accusation. You learned that not every question deserves an answer. Not every bait deserves a bite. Not every stage is yours to stand on. You learned to pause, one breath, then another, long enough to let your spirit check what your fear wanted to fix. That pause exposed the machine. Their pattern was simple: pressure, then story, then silence. But your pattern became simpler: presence. You stopped rushing to rescue your reputation and started guarding your peace. You let time do what arguments could not, and time, like truth, is loyal to those who refuse to lie. They didn't expect the mirror. That's your role now. Not to flatter, not to distort, but to reflect. And mirrors don't negotiate. The more they scrutinized you, the clearer the reflection grew. It showed the smiles that cracked under examination, the ministries powered by image management instead of love, the prayers performed to win approval rather than to seek God. They thought scrutiny would reduce you. It refined you instead. What looked like surveillance became sanctification. The glare burned off what you didn't need. Old people-pleasing fell away. Old craving for permission fell too. You emerged lean and luminous, carrying less baggage and more truth. And that truth is not personal vengeance. It's personal clarity. You can name what happened without letting it rename you. Mob mentality is powerful. The studies weren't wrong. A lie, repeated by the right voices, can feel like a verdict, but verdicts written by fear carry an expiration date. You watched as their certainty aged into suspicion, about you first, then about themselves. The mouths that mocked went quiet. The eyes that stared became restless. Because when you stop performing, you stop feeding the system that needs your reaction to survive. You chose disappearance from their stage and reappearance in your purpose. Your purpose is not to win an argument, it's to witness. A witness doesn't embellish, a witness remembers. So you remember the first time you felt the net closing, the first time you refused to shrink, the peace that followed, the clarity that arrived unannounced like morning. You remember the verse that steadied you, not as a weapon, but as water. Your Father who sees in secret. You remember Jesus, silent before loud accusers, speaking when truth would give life, walking away when spectacle begged for a show. You remember because memory is how you keep from writing their script into your identity. On paper, you were supposed to break. In practice, you became fluent in boundaries. You learned the sacred art of the short answer, the holy gift of no reply. You learned to turn your face toward light instead of turning your life into a defense exhibit. Heaven's courtroom is quieter than theirs, but its verdicts reshape history. Not guilty there sounds like courage here. Beloved there sounds like backbone here. And that's the unveiling. You weren't just spared, you were strengthened. The plot twist is not that your enemies fell. The twist is that you stood without needing them to. There's an image you can't shake. The town marching in formation, sirens flaring, papers waving, then slowing, then stumbling, then stopping as the truth they feared to face walks past with steady steps. No revenge on your tongue, no bitterness in your spine, just the calm of someone who knows where their help comes from. They will call that calm arrogance because they don't have a word for freedom that isn't permissioned by them. Let them search, let them label, let them rehearse. Their vocabulary can't contain your deliverance. And yet, hear this in love. Not everyone who watched was wicked. Some were scared, some were seduced by the comfort of belonging to the majority. Some were ignorant, not cruel. For them, your rising is a roadmap. When they're ready, your story will not condemn them. It will invite them to leave the crowd, to choose the narrow way, to trade suspicion for surrender. You were never an exhibit. You were an exit sign. So breathe. Feel the ground under your feet. The investigation is ending. The unveiling has begun. Let the room be the room, awkward, shifting, revealing. You don't have to fix eyes that refuse to see or hearts that prefer noise over truth. Your only task is to keep walking in the light that found you. Today, your silence is not surrender, it's strategy. Tomorrow, your voice will return with weight. For now, the most prophetic thing you can do is stand, unalarmed by alarms, unhurried by whispers, unafraid of the watchmen at their windows. Because this isn't a scandal, it's an unveiling. And you, chosen one, are not the villain of their story. You are the witness of God's. The shift wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The moment you walked into their space, something in the atmosphere rearranged itself without permission. People who had grown comfortable in the echo chamber of their control felt their confidence splinter. The conversation that flowed easily before suddenly fractured into awkward pauses. Eyes darted to the floor. Smiles tightened into grimaces. It wasn't what you said because you didn't say much. It was what you carried. Presence is weight, and the presence of the chosen always tips a scale. They were used to rooms bending around them, to voices softening in their company, to others instinctively playing along with their rules. But you didn't bend. You didn't adjust your essence to fit the performance. You didn't audition for their acceptance. And that made the entire structure shake like scaffolding in an earthquake. Their world was designed for actors, but you refused the script. Authenticity always feels like a threat to a stage built on performance. Look closer. It wasn't just awkwardness, it was exposure. Your calm unraveled their rehearsals. Your clarity unmasked their doublespeak. Your silence revealed their need for noise. You didn't point a finger, but the light you carried exposed their shadows. This is what spiritual authority looks like, not shouting over others, but existing in a way that makes lies impossible to sustain. Scripture records moments when Jesus stepped into a room, said almost nothing, and yet every mask trembled. Tax collectors panicked, Pharisees whispered, demons fled. His presence was enough to disturb the order, and that same current now follows you, not because you asked for it, but because heaven placed it on you. The irony is this: you weren't after their positions. You didn't even want their power. You carried something entirely different, a kingdom weight that can't be traded or purchased. But systems built on pretense cannot tolerate authenticity. If you, with no alliances, no stage, no pedigree, can walk in and command respect by simply being, then what does that say about all the years they invested in image, performance, and control? Their panic wasn't about you taking their crown, it was about you proving the crown never mattered. They couldn't explain it, so they invented explanations. Whispers, too sensitive, too spiritual, too much. False diagnoses disguised as wisdom. Half smiles that mask trembling. Because to admit the truth, that your presence shifted everything, would mean admitting their system was hollow, and that was too much to face. So they painted you as the disruption, when in reality, you only revealed the disruption already living in them. Think about it. Your mere entry rewrote the atmosphere. That's not arrogance, that's evidence of alignment. When the light in you meets the darkness in others, it creates collision. Their discomfort is not your guilt. It is their exposure. Your peace revealed their chaos. Your joy unmasked their bitterness. Your quiet made their noise sound frantic. And nothing unsettles counterfeit authority faster than the realization that authenticity doesn't need permission to exist. You know, the moment I mean. You walk into the room and suddenly the air feels thick. They shift in their seats, check their phones, clear their throats, anything to fill the silence you didn't create, but they can't stand. That silence is holy. It is the space where the Spirit begins to reveal truth. Don't rush to break it. Let it work. For in that silence, masks start slipping, alliances falter, and people feel the weight of their own pretenses. Understand this: presence is warfare. You are not battling flesh and blood, but the systems, strongholds, and agreements that keep people bound. And when you walk in aligned with heaven, the atmosphere testifies before you ever speak. This is why they fear you. Not because you're loud, but because your stillness is louder than their shouting. Not because you attack, but because your authenticity dismantles their need for an audience. And yet, here's the deeper truth. They weren't only afraid of what your light revealed in them, they were afraid of what it revealed in others. The person sitting next to them suddenly saw the hypocrisy they had ignored. The one who had been silenced for years suddenly felt boldness rise. Your presence stirred questions they had spent decades training people not to ask. You became the uninvited spark in their carefully staged theater, and once a spark ignites, the curtain can't hide the fire. You don't need to defend yourself here. You don't need to prove your worth. Just stand, just breathe. Let them scramble to patch cracks in a wall already collapsing under the weight of truth. Because the kingdom you carry doesn't shake under pressure. It shakes the ground where false power stands. You didn't come to take their place at the table. You came to show that the table was never real. This is why, even without speaking, your life began preaching. Every glance, every quiet refusal to shrink, every smile unbought and unperformed became a sermon their rituals couldn't drown out. They sensed it, they feared it, they labeled it, but nothing could stop it. The room shifted because you arrived, and no amount of whispers will ever shift it back. Because you didn't just walk in with energy, you walked in with a different kingdom. And kingdoms do not ask permission to be present, they simply arrive. They thought control was a ritual, an old, reliable formula that never failed. Apply pressure, isolate the target, feed the crowd a story, and watch the chosen one fold. It had worked before. Fear is contagious, and when repeated often enough, it can feel like law. But then you refused. You didn't bend, you didn't apologize your way into their acceptance. You didn't shrink to fit the box. And that single act of resistance broke their rhythm. What had always worked suddenly stopped. That terrified them. So they did what fragile systems always do when their illusion begins to unravel. They called for reinforcements. Not reinforcements of truth or peace, but of manipulation. They pulled in gossipers who could amplify the whispers, spiritual performers who could disguise envy as prayer, even family voices who could be used to pressure you with guilt. They used every institution they could, religion, tradition, law, culture, not to protect the innocent, but to keep the performance alive. You weren't just resisting, you were dismantling. Your very presence exposed that their unity was a ritual of fear, not a foundation of truth. And you saw it. While they scrambled to multiply their power, you recognized the pattern. Control rituals always follow the same steps. Intimidation to make you doubt yourself, isolation to make you easier to silence, then narrative capture to tell your story for you. But rituals lose their grip the moment you stop participating. You didn't argue every false claim. You didn't run to every stage they built with your name on it. You chose boundaries instead of battles, and in that choice, you broke their agreement. Because what they needed most wasn't their story. It was your reaction. Without your reaction, their ritual collapsed into smoke. Think of the silence you kept as more than silence. It was strategy. The same way Jesus stood quiet before his accusers, not because he was weak, but because he was aligned. They wanted him to lash out, to prove them right, to provide evidence for their narrative. But he gave them nothing. And still, heaven gave him everything. That's the secret you stumbled upon. You don't win by meeting lies on their stage. You win by refusing to stand on it at all. But it wasn't easy, was it? Every whisper felt like a hook in your skin. Every look of suspicion felt like a weight. There were nights you wanted to scream the truth, to clear your name, to demand that someone, anyone, see clearly. And yet something stronger pulled you into stillness. That wasn't weakness. That was wisdom. You were learning the sacred art of discernment, to know when to speak and when to let silence testify, to recognize when an explanation is grace and when it is a trap, to conserve your strength for battles that build, not for battles that only feed the performance. And this is what scared them most. They expected panic. They expected you to play defense until exhaustion made you easy to control, but you didn't. You stood. You breathed. You turned inward toward God instead of outward toward their noise. Every boundary you set became another brick falling from their crumbling wall. Every no you whispered was louder than their sirens. Every moment you refused to play their game was proof that their system had lost its power. Picture it, their stage, their lights, their audience, all ready for the scene. But when you refused to enter, the play couldn't go on. The spotlights burned holes in the curtain while the truth slipped quietly into the crowd. They thought they were watching you, but you were watching them. And in that reversal, their ritual unraveled. So let them call reinforcements. Let them multiply whispers, stack alliances, write scripts. None of it changes the fact that the system they trust is already failing. You didn't just resist their ritual, you exposed it. And exposure is a bell that can't be unrung. They thought silence would erase the evidence. They thought pressure would bury the truth. They thought your breakdown would be their alibi. But here you stand, breathing, walking, living proof. You are the receipt they never wanted God to keep. Every setup, every whispered accusation, every sideways glance in the marketplace, they all left a mark, not on you, but in the divine record. Heaven has a paper trail. Imagine a courtroom, but not one built by human hands. The judge is not swayed by popularity, the jury cannot be bribed, and the evidence is more precise than any camera. What they called concern has been logged. What they called prayer requests has been stamped with motive. The late-night calls, the whispered alliances, the smear campaigns, dressed up as care, all of it filed under truth. And you are Exhibit A, not the accused, but the witness. Every smile you forced in the middle of slander, every boundary you held when it would have been easier to collapse, every night you prayed instead of plotting revenge, those became the testimony. It stings them because they wanted your silence to be a grave. Instead, it became a gallery. Every survival step you take now is like a photograph on the wall, undeniable proof of what they tried and failed to do. Gaslighting was supposed to distort your memory. It didn't. Instead, your memory sharpened. You began collecting not just what was said, but how it felt, the tone, the timing, the intent behind the concern. And where confusion once clouded you, clarity now stands like a witness in the room. Let's name it plainly. Gaslighting is when lies are repeated so forcefully they make you question your own sanity. But here's what no manipulator can undo. Your soul remembers peace, and your spirit recognizes truth. Each time you rose from the fog, you added another page to the file. That's why your very existence unsettles them. You are the walking archive. And while they try to rewrite the story, your survival keeps reading back the original version. They thought heaven's justice would delay forever. They thought their titles or their robes or their reputations could cover the trail. But God saw it all. Every smirk, every trap, every closed-door decision. Scripture whispers it like thunder. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you, in judgment you shall condemn. That isn't poetry, it's a verdict. The gavel has already dropped. And you feel it now, don't you? The weight that once made your chest tighten is lifting. The pressure that once made your hands shake is breaking. Because truth, when it finally breathes, carries oxygen for the soul. What once suffocated you is now the very air you stand in. That is the divine receipt, not just survival, but transformation. Not just enduring, but outgrowing. The people who plotted believed their narrative was airtight. Yet the cracks show in their own words. Their stories don't align anymore. Their urgency has turned into paranoia. They scramble because they know what heaven already ruled. The case isn't against you, it's against them. And the irony is devastating. In trying to document your downfall, they documented their own motives. In trying to erase your name, they engraved their hypocrisy. In trying to make you the suspect, they became the evidence. So stand tall, chosen one. You are not here begging for acquittal. You are here walking in a verdict already delivered. The divine archive is not a rumor, it is reality. And every step you take forward is the stamp. Documented, delivered, divine. Fear will make enemies into allies faster than truth ever could. That's what happened when you walked into their world. They didn't unite because they loved each other. They united because they feared you. And fear, when dressed in robes and titles, can look a lot like power, but it isn't. It never was. Their unity was fueled by desperation, not strength. Think about it. Some of the people who whispered against you never even liked one another. Old grudges dissolved overnight, not because they were healed, but because they discovered a common target: you. They huddled in circles, started group chats, shared knowing glances, all in the name of protecting the community. But underneath, it was panic, pure, unfiltered panic. You didn't follow their script. You didn't bow to their rituals. You didn't need their platform to shine, and that independence terrified them. Fear disguised itself as strategy. Some cloaked it in prayer circles, quoting scripture like daggers. Others leaned on titles and status, flexing authority that never truly belonged to them. A few relied on gossip, feeding rumors into the air like smoke bombs to cloud perception. But none of it was real, because real authority stands alone. Counterfeit authority always needs a crowd. They needed numbers because not one of them had the courage to confront you in the open. And that alone reveals the truth. Their strength was never strength. It was insecurity bound together by fear. And then came the mirror. That was the real reason for their rage. You became the reflection they couldn't destroy, not because you attacked them, but because your presence exposed them. Your joy revealed their bitterness. Your courage reflected their compromises. Your resilience reminded them of the selves they abandoned long ago to fit into a system of control. Every time they saw you, they saw what they could have been: free, bold, unbought. And instead of facing that grief, they fought you. They whispered your name in back rooms. They spun stories until even they struggled to keep the details straight. They painted you as unstable, rebellious, dramatic. But their accusations weren't about you. They were confessions about themselves, because mirrors don't lie, and mirrors don't break just because someone refuses to look. You stood there, forged in fire, whole, unshaken. They threw everything they had at the reflection, and still it stared back, clear and undeniable. Here's the tender part. It hurt, didn't it? Losing community, watching familiar faces turn cold, realizing that loyalty was more fragile than you thought. There were nights when you grieved the tribe you thought you had. That grief is holy. It means you loved honestly, but it also means you outgrew the counterfeit. Their false unity collapsed because it was never built on truth. And your heart, though bruised, now beats in rhythm with something real, something heaven authored. So let them scatter, let the masks fall, let the alliances crumble. What was bound in fear will always fracture under light. And you don't need to chase what broke. You carry a different kind of unity now. Not crowds shouting in agreement, but heaven standing in alignment. That's why you're still here. That's why your reflection remains. The mirror is unbroken, and it's not going anywhere. They called it concern, but it was control. They sounded alarms not to save you, but to silence you. Suddenly, conversation shifted. We're worried about their mental health. We're not sure they're stable. We need to intervene. But peel back the layers and you'd see it clearly. None of it was genuine care. It was damage control. The revelation rising in you was too sharp, too undeniable, too dangerous to their image. So they staged emergencies, fake fires to distract from the real one, the system itself burning down. It's an old tactic. Label the chosen one as unstable, and you never have to answer their truth. Paint discernment as delusion, and you never have to explain hypocrisy. They thought if they cried wolf loudly enough, the crowd would never pause long enough to hear your side. And for a while, it worked. Whispers spread, suspicion grew, you became the subject of hushed conversations and sympathetic nods. But the irony? Every false alarm only revealed their desperation. If you were truly as fragile as they claimed, why did it take so many alarms to contain you? That's when you started to see the deeper pattern. This wasn't just gossip, it was programming. A cult by another name. Communities built on fear always reward obedience and punish independence. Speak softly, follow blindly, and you are celebrated. Raise questions, reclaim your voice, and suddenly you're the problem. Silence is holiness, they said, but your voice, rebellion. Their rituals depended on this trade. Conformity in exchange for acceptance. And when you refused the trade, their entire system trembled. Think of it like a script they'd been performing for years. The roles were clear. Leaders controlled, followers complied, outsiders were shunned. The show only worked if everyone stayed in character, but you walked off the stage. You stopped reciting lines that weren't yours. You broke character and, in doing so, broke the illusion. That's why the alarms went off. Not because you were unstable, but because you were uncontrollable. And yet, here's the paradox. They underestimated what freedom would cost them. They thought you'd collapse outside their circle. Instead, you found clarity. They thought you'd crumble without their approval. Instead, you discovered peace. You didn't just survive leaving the cult. You walked out with your soul intact. And that, more than anything, was unforgivable to them. Because if you could thrive beyond their control, then the spell never really worked. You began noticing the cracks, how scriptures were twisted into weapons, how accountability was used to enforce silence, how community was a mask for conformity. And once your eyes adjusted to that light, there was no going back. You stopped drinking the Kool-Aid of guilt and fear. You stopped apologizing for existing with power. You remembered who you were before their narratives rewrote your name. And with every memory, you became more dangerous to their system. But don't miss this. Your clarity wasn't just rebellion. It was healing. You weren't lashing out. You were breaking free. You weren't bitter. You were bold. The difference matters, because cults collapse when truth speaks without venom, when freedom stands without apology. You didn't need to scream. Your steady walk away was the loudest sermon you could preach. So breathe deep. Feel the air of freedom filling your lungs. You are proof that the system doesn't own everyone it touches. You are the crack in the wall, the leak in the dam, the living testimony that control has limits. And while they whisper about your danger, the truth is clear. The only thing dangerous about you is that you woke up and you didn't go back to sleep. You survived the alarms, you survived the cult, and you walked out unbrainwashed, carrying your soul intact, carrying your freedom forward. They wanted you to be a spectacle. They needed you to be the scandal. But the longer you stood, the clearer it became. You weren't the drama. You were the disruption. And with every breath you took in freedom, their entire system started to shake. Their empire wasn't toppled by a loud rebellion. It unraveled brick by brick under the weight of quiet truth. Your survival wasn't supposed to happen. In their calculations, the pressure would have crushed you by now. The gossip would have buried you. The false reports would have silenced you. Instead, you became the one thing they couldn't account for, a signal. The kind of signal heaven sends to announce that the old formula no longer works. You weren't just surviving, you were rewiring the atmosphere. Look at what happened to their rituals. They used intimidation, but it fizzled. The stares, the subtle threats, the heavy pauses meant to shrink you. None of it landed. You stood taller. They leaned on gossip, thinking repetition would rewrite reality. But the more they spoke, the more the lies contradicted themselves, exposing desperation instead of authority. And even their prayers, twisted with hidden motives, coated with performance, fell flat. Because prayers offered for control never reached the throne. It rattled them. They called you unstable, but your consistency was sharper than their chaos. They painted you as a rebel, but your alignment with truth made their order look counterfeit. You didn't match their rhythm because you weren't supposed to. You were heaven's interruption, a divine variable in a system that thought it could run unchecked forever. This is why the whispers grew frantic. You weren't chasing platforms, yet people started paying attention. You weren't begging for respect, yet your presence commanded it. Not because you fought for recognition, but because real authority doesn't need applause. It simply is. And every time you showed up with unshaken peace, another mask cracked. Another structure trembled. Another person started asking questions they weren't supposed to ask. Prophecy doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it looks like resilience. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes it looks like someone the system couldn't break standing in the middle of its collapse. That's what you became. A living prophecy, a quiet revelation, a mirror of what happens when divine alignment collides with counterfeit control. And now they're not just watching you, they're watching their own downfall reflected through you. Their rituals aren't working. Their stories aren't sticking. Their unity is cracking. and all you did was remain, stand, breathe, walk in truth. This is divine justice, not revenge, not chaos, calm, precise, undeniable. They can't explain it. They know the calls they made, the lies they spread, the pressure they applied behind closed doors. They stacked the deck against you, certain you would fold. Yet here you are, not just standing, but thriving. And now the investigation has shifted. They aren't studying your faults anymore. They're studying your survival. How are you still here? How did you not break? The questions haunt them because the answers point to a power they can't manufacture. Your silence once made them laugh. They mistook it for defeat, for weakness, for surrender. They filled in the blanks of your story, told their version with confidence, paraded your name as a warning. But your silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. In the quiet, God rebuilt you. Wounds became wisdom. Discernment sharpened like a blade. And when your voice returned, it carried a weight that cracked their foundations. Not bitterness, not revenge, revelation. Every word you speak now echoes with authority that no stage or system can drown out. They tremble because they realize it's not just you speaking, it's truth speaking through you. And truth, once released, spreads like wildfire. Masks slip. People start asking questions, stories unravel. The false narrative collapses under the gravity of your testimony. The same silence they mocked became the soil of your power. And now your voice is the alarm they cannot mute. From the beginning, they sensed it. You were not here to blend in. You were prophecy in flesh, a signal that the spell of fear was breaking. Your very presence disrupted their rituals. You didn't need to flip their table. Your authenticity made the whole table collapse under its own weight. They feared you not because you were rebellious, but because you were awake. And the awake always disturb the comfortable. This was never scandal. It was revelation, never gossip, always prophecy. The manipulation, the false unity, the staged emergencies, they weren't accidents. They were symptoms of a system terrified of truth. And you were heaven's chosen interruption. You didn't just endure, you exposed. You didn't just survive, you awakened. Now the smoke is clearing and the rituals have failed. Their systems are malfunctioning, their narratives unraveling, and you stand not as a victim, but as living proof that no weapon, no rumor, no ritual can cancel what heaven has declared. You are not their problem. You are their prophecy fulfilled. So stand tall, glow freely, speak when led, stay silent when sacred, because every move you make now is not just survival, it's fulfillment. The gates they built are shaking, and no power on earth can hold back what has already been set in motion. This is not the end of your story. This is the unveiling of it, and heaven is still writing.